This is, or rather it was, the most affordable US electric vehicle. It's now discontinued. The next car by a US company on this affordability list is the Tesla Model 3, which starts at almost $40,000. EVs are really expensive in the US, and even with the tax credits, the carbon neutral initiatives, the climate change campaigns, we're falling behind on EV adoption. But move one country down to, say, Mexico, and you'll find a huge selection of EVs far more affordable than anything that you can find in the States. I flew a couple more countries down to Costa Rica, where the same thing is happening. Here in Costa Rica, they have like a green license plate, so you know they're EVs. Oh, that's one. I have no idea what that car brand is. These countries have plenty of EV options for under $20,000, names that I'm probably gonna butcher right now. Zakwa, Zev, Jack, Carry, Kai, Maxus, Geely, ZNA. Brands that, as an American, you've probably never heard of. Brands that are, in essence, banned from the US. This practice of banning foreign competitors is in part the result of some trauma and some denial by the US auto industry and the government trying to reconcile with it. Let's go back to the 1950s. This is a post-war economic boom, breeding ground for baby boomers, and three car companies dominate the US car market: GM, Ford, and Chrysler. And suddenly, this new car company comes into the market in 1957, and then another one around the same time. Nobody wanted these companies around. The big three didn't want competition. Americans in general were salty, against their enemy from World War II. So much so that Nissan actually had to change their name. And slowly but surely, these cars picked up popularity, because these Japanese cars were reliable and affordable and fuel efficient. European cars were added to the mix around this time as well, but those were not your average family car. In '73, the oil crisis came, so US production had just peaked, and all Arab exporting countries had banned exports of oil to any country supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Oil prices skyrocketed in America, and even though the embargo ended in '74, oil prices remained really high through the decade. And while consumers were happy, US car manufacturers were not, and with pressure from lobbyists and unions, the US government was not too happy about these Japanese car invasion either. In the '80s, Reagan ran his campaign on this agenda to slow Japanese car imports. And it kind of worked. He negotiated export restraints and convinced these Japanese companies to establish manufacturing plants in the US, which meant jobs and some tax money, at least until those workers eventually got replaced, not by other foreign car manufacturing companies, but by machines. But that's another story. However, the silver lining of this story is that we ended up with better, more fuel efficient, more reliable US-made cars. Competition helped the big three step up their game. It's like the 5 stages of grief, which we're actually going to revisit soon. By the mid-2000s, Asian automakers accounted for a whopping 40% of US car sales. Meanwhile, the US government was bailing out Detroit. It's a wound that the government and the economy remember vividly. Since then, American brands, and Tesla specifically, have acquired a large wedge of the US EV market share, but American brands and European brands have really struggled to make these cars affordable. But China is a different story. Take BYD, for example, China's star player, and as of 2024, the largest EV manufacturer in the world. They started as a battery company in '95, this will be important later. They pivoted into cars in 2003, and finally, they launched their debut BYD F3 in 2005. You can cut a lot of costs when you make your own batteries and, when you just copy another car's design. But heck, it works. Tesla made an average of $8,200 per car in 2023, an 18% gross margin. BYD made about $1,700 per car on a 26% gross margin. So how the hell do they get away with making a car at a fraction of Tesla's production costs? Take this example. This is the BYD Yuan Plus, their crossover SUV, the equivalent to a Tesla Model Y. At the beginning of 2023, the estimated cost of materials and manufacturing for a Tesla Model Y was $39,000. The Yuan Plus sells in China for just $16,000. That is the sale price, which means that the cost of materials of making this car has to be around $13,000. That's a third of what Tesla is paying. And how different are these cars? You've got your touchscreen, comfortable space, nearly 300 miles of range, and honestly, a very decent finish. Much better than what you would get from a $16,000 car in the US. So, is this car cooler than a Tesla? Okay, maybe no. Is there a BYD car floating in space playing David Bowie? Okay, no. But this is a perfectly fine vehicle. It's affordable, it's available in Costa Rica, and it has all the support and the warranty that you expect from a dealership. So in the case of Tesla, the 61 kilowatt hour battery in a Tesla Model Y is estimated to cost the company around $6,200. They outsource those batteries to companies like Panasonic, LG, and rumor has it, to BYD as well. BYD was a battery company, remember? So for the 50 kilowatt hour battery on their Yuan Plus, they just make it themselves, and it costs them as little as $3,000 per battery. Yes, of course, cheaper labor is a factor. Yes, Chinese government subsidies are a factor too, but the bottom line is that really affordable electric cars exist, and we just can't buy them in the US.
Ese sí sería 512 kilómetros, tracción trasera. De esta versión te ofrezco 4x4.
The US is most definitely in a denial phase, and with a history of lost market share to foreign automakers, well, it's doing something about it this time. During the 2018 trade war with China, Trump set an additional 25% tariff on Chinese-made cars. But before you go out and blame Trump for all this, we should say that the Democrats are very much on the same page about the tariffs to Chinese cars, and there's a bill currently in the Senate to raise those tariffs to 100%. BYD has made it clear that they don't want to enter the US market, and the reason is very simple. These Chinese companies don't want the trouble of going to a market that doesn't like them, that doesn't want them. They have plenty of room to get cheap cars to the rest of the world, and quite honestly, they're making a killing at that market, and they're getting stronger and dominating the world in the process. So it seems that this time around, the US is patching the problem with tariffs rather than looking to innovate and beat the competition. Latin American countries generally don't manufacture their own cars, so they are just consumers benefiting from cheaper alternatives. It doesn't really affect their job market. But Japan has also been invaded by Chinese cars, and they do care about their own car manufacturing jobs. But instead of patching that with tariffs, they're looking to innovate. For example, Nissan and Honda are teaming up to develop their own EVs together. Their auto industry needs to stay competitive. The US government seems to be playing this very poor balancing act between reducing CO2 emissions and then getting votes, getting reelected, especially from swing states like Michigan, the single state where the most car manufacturing jobs are. And caught in the very middle of this balancing act is the rest of us as consumers. I mean, it's not an easy problem to solve. On one hand, you can just slap tariffs on the problem, stop Chinese car imports, which preserves American jobs, at least until machines replace them, but that's bad for consumers who have to deal with more expensive cars. It certainly slows down the country's efforts to reduce carbon emissions, and the US is already far behind the rest of the world on this, but more crucially, I think it puts American car manufacturing at a disadvantage. You see this in Latin America a little bit. People who want a luxury car, they'll generally buy a European car. And people who want an affordable car, they'll buy Asian. And American cars are kind of stuck in the middle of these two, and they're not winning at either game. Sure, Michigan votes are crucial to the election. You have to keep those constituents and those unions happy. But this patch policy is handing EV dominance to China on a silver platter.